This is the Free Heel Life Podcast, episode number 47. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Free Heel Life Shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And guess what? We've been open for about a week now, and it feels good. It's nice to be open because that means it's going to snow soon. Actually, we got a nice little dusting just a couple days ago. So winter is a little more visible up in the hills, and it's starting to cool down here in the valley in Salt Lake, and I hope it is doing that wherever you are at as well. Can't wait to make some turns. All right. As far as newsroom and notes, new arrivals this week include our Scarpa NTN boots. We've got some of the Scott NTN boots and some of the 75 millimeter sizes in. We've got Bishop skis. Volet skis have arrived, and we are getting new stuff every day. So you can either check the website, freeheellife.com, or you can follow us on our various social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and we are all about it. And it's always a good time if you like to follow along. Don't do it too much, though. You got to save some time to get outside. So one other cool thing we just got in is new Unity Tracks neck tubes. So if you're looking for something to cover up during this interesting time in the world, we now have those, and you can find those on the website as well. I'm just going to put a little teaser out there. I've got some really fun news that I want to share with you regarding the upcoming winter. I can't quite yet tell you what it is, but I can say that we are going to be launching a little beta project, and we're going to be launching it pretty soon, and I should have the details to start telling you about it in the near future. But anybody who knows me well knows that I like to experiment. The Free Heel Life in and of itself has always been an experiment. And I always say, like the great Joe Strummer says, it's death or glory. And that's kind of how we've always operated. We're going to go for it, and hopefully it all works. So we're going to try something new this year and try to make this even a better experience for other people out there. So stay tuned for all you people that listen every week. I really appreciate it. I'm having a blast, and I hope you are as well, listening to all the crazy people I'm digging up from the telemark world. So today's episode, I'm going to be talking to Dave Bombard from Bishop Bindings. And Dave grew up in Massachusetts and grew up skiing at Wachusset and other New England ski areas. And after graduate school, he headed west to be closer to skiing in the mountains while pursuing a career as an engineer, specifically dealing with medical devices and surgical tooling. Several of those years were in California, but he eventually moved to Colorado, up in the mountains. And during a stint of consulting and working remote, he met Fin Doyle, who is the original owner of Bombard Industries and creator of the original Bishop binding that was produced for about 5 years in the early 2000s. Fin and Dave originally created a partnership to relaunch the Bishop binding, but in the end, Dave acquired the rights to the original design and launched his own business, and along with it, the Bishop 2.0. So please welcome to the show, Dave Bombard. All right, Dave, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing, man?
Good. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm stoked. Everyone's always giving me shit about not having Bishop talked about more. So here we are. We've got it from the horse's mouth. I'm stoked to catch up. So, yeah, man. So I was just I always like to kind of start these off with, with industry folks trying to figure out where do you come from? Like, are you a mountain guy? Like, where did you grow up?
Yeah. Well, no. Well, I grew up in the mountains of central Massachusetts.
Oh, there you go. Is that Wachusset?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I started on this tiny little hill in the town next door. So I grew up outside of Worcester, Mass, and this little Ward Hill, which is now called something else, but Ski Ward or something. But and I know the owner actually. I've been back there a couple of times, and it's cool. It's a great little hill. You just need, it was maybe 300 vert, right? So that's all you kind of needed to learn. And we'd have these from school, my public elementary school. We'd have after school programs where you go and learn how to ski. And so yeah, I started there. But I was like, we'd go up to New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine. Once I started getting a little bit better, Wachusett was the next step. And then up to Vermont and Maine and those mountains, and learned on the packed powder, which is AKA ice.
I love that. I didn't know you were from Mass. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I'm a Masshole.
Fun. I didn't say it. I don't like to generalize.
I'll say it. I own it. It's fine.
I don't like to generalize. Actually, that's hilarious because literally like 30 minutes ago we were talking about Worcester because.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about that, and I was trying to tell the West Coast. We have a couple of kids that have lived in Mass, and they were saying Worcester, and I was like, yeah, but do the West Coast guys here know how to spell Worcester? And so
right.
It's not Worcester.
It's not Wooster.
Yeah, how do you spell it? How do you
Worcester? It's actually the same as in England. I was actually out at a wedding in England, and we were driving to Cirencester. It's like Hogwarts type town, really cool. That's old hilarious. English town. And I saw the sign. It's like Worcester, and it was, in fact, they even pronounce it the same way we do, except a little nicer, right? Like a little actual English accent versus the Central Mass kind of potty and wicked hat accent.
Oh yeah, wicked. Yeah, wicked's the other one. So shout out to all the right coasters and that's awesome. Yeah, so that's cool. So you were skiing when you were younger though, like kind of classic New England kid growing up on the ice and skiing a bunch.
Yeah, I was on the freestyle team at Wachusset Mountain.
Oh, nice.
At that time,
doing moguls.
Moguls and aerials. We did like we're doing daffies and maybe a heli here and there, but it was pretty tame. But and then we also actually at that time we did ballet.
Oh wow,
I never got I never actually got that into it. But we did friggin' kind of a little routine. I did like crossover 360s, and I still best them out sometimes. They're kind of fun to do.
Can you do? Can you rock like the long poles and do all the pole tricks and stuff?
No, I never got the poles. That was a little much, for a high school, junior high school boy at that time. A
little rough.
It was a little, I didn't do that, but I did do like pole. What are they called? Like with even regular poles, you do like Glenn Plake used to do them all the time.
Yep.
Like, what are they called? Like, you just kind of go along, plant your poles, and do like a tip roll.
Yeah, tip rolls.
Like
yep, tip rolls.
Tip rolls. Yeah, so I used to do those and stuff. So.
Oh, that's cool.
It was fun. It was the only award I got was I didn't get anything for actual technique. I got like a little trophy that said biggest freestyle ham. So like.
Oh my God, that's so. Is this in the 90s that you're doing that?
This is late 80s.
Late 80s.
Yeah.
So
that was kind of where. Good.
Oh, I was just gonna say, who was your idol, your mogul skiing idol in the 80s?
Man,
was there one?
I don't really know if there. I didn't know. I don't know. I'm sure there was, probably, right? Like on those tours. I didn't follow it though. Like there was a big freestyle tour, right, that had bumps, aerials, and moguls. Yeah. I mean bumps. Aerials and ballet at that time.
Yeah, those ballet videos are funny to watch. They're pretty wild.
Yeah. They're hilarious.
Yeah, because I know Plake was a mogul guy in the 80s, but it was kind of in between the Wang Wong 70s era and kind of I guess late 80s was it like most of those mogul guys started becoming the quote unquote extreme skiers of the time, I guess, because that's when all the Greg Stump videos would have started coming out.
Yeah, and that's what we would watch. That was more in the early 90s, so we'd watch, all the Greg Stump stuff. P-Tex Lies and Duct Tape. I just absolutely love that movie. We watched that on VHS until it wore out.
Yep, totally.
I love you, P-Tex.
That's so funny. I need to go back and watch some of those. I remember renting the VHS at the video store.
Yeah.
That's so funny. I was more of a Good, the Rad, and the Gnarly and Blizzard of Oz, I think were my two favorites.
Yeah, Blizzard of Oz was amazing. I mean, that stuff they did in Chamonix back then, like, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Incredible.
That is the one where they're like,
Yeah.
they're like rappelling off the Aiguille du Midi.
Yeah.
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 That's some wild stuff. I can't even believe they were skiing that on that.
And those like
straight. So crazy. And they were skiing you guys were probably skiing moguls on 200s back then, I would think.
Yeah, I guess so. They didn't really like, and I never got, even back then, they did have like Hart, right? That was the manufacturer of like Mogul skis. I think they maybe still are. I don't know. Are they still around?
Yeah. No, I think, Hart. Yeah. That's kind of seems obscure now, but I think they do make Mogul skis still.
Yeah. So I just had my standard skis, and we would just do our best. So yeah, that's where I learned. And then, I always thought I taught too in high school. I remember I taught at that little Ward Hill area. And I always kind of thought about going out west and skiing and teaching. And not until really grad school, my first trip to Utah, actually, my first time really skiing powder was at Alta. Or maybe even it was Snowbird that day. It was a tram at Snowbird.
Yeah, trams at Snowbird.
Yeah, and it was unbelievable. I remember just like this powder day there. And I knew I was a good enough skier to ski it, and I kind of got used to it pretty quick, but it was just amazing. I remember just in hearing everyone, right? Like just hooping and hollering and jumping off everything. And I remember going up a chairlift, and some guy's coming down, ripping through the powder, and he goes off this cliff and then just explodes. It's cratered completely under the lift. And we're like, "Hey man, are you okay?" He's like, "Of course I'm okay, dude. It's powder day." And I was like, "Oh, I get it. So you can just kind of go off anything."
Yeah, I bet that was eye-opening.
So
coming. Yeah, you don't get that at Ward Hill. That's for sure.
No. Yeah, you just that you can when it's that deep, just people are just throwing off everything.
Yeah.
And I saw more of that, and so then I ended up after kind of grad school going out and teaching skiing at Breck. That's where really I kind of got first introduced to the telemark turn, doing some clinics. Like we just did tele as kind of like a clinic. And it was, I enjoyed the turn, and I didn't have gear, I don't think then. But that was kind of my introduction then. And then I was only there for about a year, and then, eventually moved out to California to kind of San Francisco, Silicon Valley. So we'd then go up to Tahoe a bunch in the 90s, kind of mid 90s. And at that time, really backcountry, like I got into tele more because that was backcountry gear. Like the most reliable stuff, and really the only stuff was kind of tele at that time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you did you go to school on the East Coast then and then come out west to work? Or
yeah.
So okay.
Yeah. I went to school both undergrad and grad on the kind of East Coast, and then after grad school, kind of came out and took a year kind of off, which people are like, "What?" Like I have an engineering degree, master's in mechanical engineering. Like, yeah, I'm gonna go ski.
That's dangerous. You might not have made it out. A lot of guys.
I know. I did. I know.
A lot of people don't. You meet them like 15 years later and they're like, yeah, so I did have a degree and then I didn't go to work because I went skiing and that seemed way cooler.
Yeah, and it was. I kind of set myself a pretty time limit. Like, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this for a year and then kind of, go back. And I ended up being a river guide for the summer. It was awesome. Like I loved Colorado. I love the mountains. I'd always loved the mountains, but I really kind of fell in love with them more when I came out. Lived in Breck for the winter and then lived down in Salida, lived in a tent up on Mount Shavanoff for the summer.
Oh, that's a pretty area.
Yeah, it's great. River guide and stuff like that. So then that was always like, and then traveling around the West after that, I just kind of I got my Subaru GL wagon.
Oh, there you go.
And, just traveled around and would just stay in like BLM land and went out to the West Coast actually, and then stayed with some friends. I had some friends who were going to grad school at Stanford, and so hung out in Palo Alto. I was like, "Ooh, this is kind of nice." And so that's where I said, maybe I'll work out there. Also, because I was in medical, so my engineering was always in my degrees. I kind of focused on medical devices, or that was my interest. product design and development for like surgical instruments and things. So I ended up getting a job out in kind of Silicon Valley, working out there. And then, you go to Tahoe, because that's, we'd get a bunch of us would get together and rent a cabin up in Tahoe for the winter, maybe 12 to 20 people.
Wow. And that was like the weekend getaway for everybody. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a long way though. It's like, it's 3 to like 6 hours, like driving up from the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Because of traffic and, they shut that thing down. And
that drive is heinous. It's kind of like, I always said that too. It's like, you get the coast, but then that drive is brutal. It's kind of like when people in the last 10, 15 years, they'd be like, I'm moving to Denver to be in the mountains. And I'm like, why would you want to drive I-70? Like, like, I don't know if that seems like a great idea now, but I don't know. Utah is going to probably turn into that at some point. It's karma for me, for sure. So. Yeah,
that's close. I mean, Utah is, so we looked. So once we decided we wanted to move out of the Bay Area, my wife and I, so we got married in 2004. And actually, it's funny. I met my wife as a ski instructor in Breck. That's how we met. We were in the same pod awesome. on Peak 8. Yeah, it was Peak 8. Peak 7 didn't really exist.
You just have to remember the anniversary, man. That's all you got to remember.
I know.
Not which peak it was.
Yeah. That's key. And then we always kind of, I think, we're like, all right, I just don't see raising a family in the Bay Area is great. But the cost and, we just really, I think, wanted to move back to the mountains, and Salt Lake City was high on the list. We kind of did a little tour, and, it's got a lot going for it. Right.
Yeah. It's definitely more happening now. When did you move out of the Bay Area?
2008. So we ended up moving up to Tahoe for like a year and a half. In 2007, I think 6, 7. And then, it kind of wasn't working out. I was consulting at that time. So I was trying to get more flexible and work more kind of remotely and doing some kind of consulting work. And, it didn't really work out. So we kind of did a big tour, kind of went to Bend, visited some good friends of ours in Bend, Oregon, and then out to Portland, checked out Portland, Seattle. I had some friends, and, checked up, and then kind of went backpacking up north, like up in Glacier, and then down to Salt Lake on a big tour to like, okay, let's just check out these places and see kind of what feels good.
Were you in the East Bay, or were you over in San Francisco proper?
No, I live in San Francisco. I lived down in Redwood City.
Oh, okay.
I called it the city, but when I moved out there, I quickly realized that I wanted to be in the actual city.
Totally. I was going to say, if you were telemarking back then, did you ever go to Marmot Mountain Works over in Berkeley?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. That's where I got my boots. That's where I got fitted.
Yeah.
They're no longer, though, eh?
No, they are no longer. Shout out to Marmot Mountain Works. I used to show my movies there, actually. And
what a cool building, too, eh?
Oh, yeah. That was the thing, is it was an old, for those that have not been there, it was this old church, I believe. And
I think so.
They had a lot of the ski setup. You remember, if you walk into the end of the building, it was like stained glass windows, and kind of almost like I don't even know. Kind of going back to that, almost like an old English building, like I don't know if that's the way to describe it.
Like kind of like, I think it was a little Tudor, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of like that rounded, like rooftop and kind of funky old church looking thing. I think it was on the
really cool shop.
corner Ashby and Adeline, if I remember. I can't.
Oh, wow. That's pretty good.
I think.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I remember how to get there at the time.
Yeah, that was a cool shop, and that was the telemark spot back then for sure.
Yep.
And that guy had a shop up in Bellevue, Washington, I think too. And yeah, unfortunately, they are no longer. It's hard to find tele gear in that San Francisco area. So, but well, that's cool. So you ended up eventually. So Tahoe, then you guys ended up in Colorado.
Yep, back to Vail. We really came out to kind of start a company doing medical device stuff with a surgeon out here at the Stedman Clinic. But that was 2008 is when, well, it was actually 2007, 2008 came out here, and then, the economy just tanked.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. You got there right before that.
Yeah. So we kind of kept that going for a little bit, but it didn't really work out. And then I went back to consulting, but doing what I did in terms of medical device consulting and, so specific up here just didn't really work. I mean, it worked out okay, but didn't really work out like I wanted to. And then I ended up through consulting, I was actually kind of a super long story, but I met Finn.
Oh, that's how you met him, was through consulting?
Yeah, and it was this is
Fin Doyle for people that don't know. He was the owner of Bomber Industries, which I'm sure we'll get into this now.
Yeah, so
this is the segue into meeting Fin Doyle.
Exactly. Yeah. So he really was a hard boot snowboard binding guy, right? Like carving his bomb. I forget what his bindings were called, but Bomber Industries made these Bomber all machined hard boot kind of plate bindings for like
it was like carving snowboards.
Carving. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Kind of in I think he was like mid 90s when he really started that. And then he kind of had this idea he actually borrowed a lot of the ideas, like the bales of the original Bomber Bishop. The bale idea came from his snowboard bindings.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. It's basically just inverted, because I think the latch on that one's on the toe, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Or maybe a version of it. I can't remember.
I can't remember either.
I remember it looking like the. Oh, actually, no, you might be right, because just the bale. You're talking like the toe bale, not the heel throw part.
Right. Yeah.
No, and it really did look like that. It's all. I guess it's all CNC'd aluminum. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And he was he was an engineer, I think, by training, but he also was a machinist. He was a really good machinist, and he had a couple of CNC machines, and he, made a lot of those parts. Some he kind of outsourced, but he made a lot of those parts. And then, Telluride was, in this golden age around 2000, right? A lot of energy into it. A lot of companies, doing things, the skis and bindings, and so he kind of jumped in and took his binding, and they came up with this sliding plate technology of the two tubes and the rear case that slides on it. And came up with the Bishop. That was the name of the binding. So it was Bomber Industries. The Bomber Bishop was the binding. It came out, I think, around 2001. I want to say. Yeah,
it's great. I was teaching some guys here at the shop some history, and I was putting the original Bishop up against the Targa, which at the time was the #1 selling binding, and I was trying to explain like how crazy the Bishop seemed at that point, because you had this lateral stability. All the Summit guys, all the Summit County guys in Colorado, like Breck, Keystone.
Yeah, Evan Mond.
Yeah, there was a guy named Brian Moon.
Brian Moon, yep. He was one of the athletes for
old school, yeah. And he was that was an interesting time, because that was the only place we were really seeing it. And these guys would come to events, and we'd be like, dude, you guys' bindings are crazy looking. Like they're not floppy, and they're all metal. It was pretty innovative. Pretty innovative. So when you guys met, how did you guys meet through consulting? Was he also doing some sort of machining for medical stuff, or?
No, well, actually I did end up doing a few, like I was working with some different surgeons, and I would do kind of some early prototyping, and there's no machine shops up here. So he did a few little jobs for me. He didn't like to do that, but I got to know him through this other guy, what's his name, who like had an idea for like a snowboard binding that was kind of specifically for kite board.
Oh wow.
Snowboarding, what's that called? Like,
kiteboarding.
Kiteboarding, yeah, but on the snow, or
yeah.
So they do it on the reservoir, like in Dillon.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
In the winter, a lot of people kite around on that thing, and they use snowboards. This guy had like an idea for a snowboard binding, and then I think, hey, let's get Finn. He's the snowboard guy here. So we kind of brought him in, and then Finn and I kind of hit it off. Couple nerds, and hey, that's cool. And his shop, I was like, wow, you have a really nice, like 2 CNCs. You have some like a really nice shop for up here in the mountains. And then we kind of just chatted. He did a couple things for me, and then we ended up like, hey, the bishop at that time, this is probably 2008, right? Yeah, kind of when I came out, maybe 2009 actually, 9 or 10. And then I was like, hey, let's, I was kind of looking for something other than the consulting, because it wasn't really working out. So I was like, hey, let's try something. We actually formed a partnership together. So Finn and I created a little partnership, like, hey, let's look at making a new binding, right? He had a ton of experience with the bishop, and we were kind of looking at something really different and innovative, and it ended up, we both had other things going on, so we just didn't, to do something like that, you got to really focus on it.
Yeah. And
it was a side project for us.
Yeah. And he wasn't, was it maybe like 06, 07? Like, I mean, he wasn't even making the bishop at a certain point.
Yeah, he stopped around 2005.
Oh, was it that early? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
he only sold it for 5 or 6 years.
Right. Yeah. It was like a really short window, and then it had like such a dedicated following, like a lot of bindings do. And yeah. And then I remember hearing something. I think there was some sort of legal thing with the snowboard binding. I don't remember the whole story, and that's probably a whole rabbit hole. But
yeah,
I just all I remember hearing was like, where did Bishop go? And it was like, oh, that guy stopped making the bindings and then started making WRX parts for Subarus or something. Was that true?
Oh. He really was into that. I'm not sure he ever did that for a product, to sell.
Okay.
But in his shop, he would soup up his Subaru, and he was really into.
So there is some truth to that.
Yeah, he was definitely a gearhead, motorhead guy on the side. He had some really cool. He customized his Subaru. He customized enduro bikes. He was really into maybe a KZR, enduro bike that he kind of messed around with. So yeah, he was definitely into the motorsports.
Yeah,
and then we ended up saying, okay, it wasn't really going anywhere. I was like, all right, well, at that time I had just actually had our first child. We had our first child, Collins, and she was only, she was just a baby. It was 2011. And I'm like, well, should we do this? Should I really try to make this a thing and go into telemark? And I'm like, all right, let's give it. And I was like, let's give it a go.
You did some market analysis and saw that it was massive.
Yeah, exactly.
You were ready to go.
I put on my MBA hat and I was like, yes, this is the market. It's the biggest.
This is where we're going.
Yeah, so it was a lifestyle decision, right? Because we wanted to stay in the mountains, and I really wanted to do something that connected me to the mountains. And I love innovating. I love designing. I love telemark skiing. I really got into telemark skiing. There's a group here. Kind of called the Vail Players Club. Shout out to the Vail Players Club out there.
Sean Hannigan.
Exactly, Sean. We would just go and have such a good time. Go out there, and we wouldn't have to necessarily be telliers, but we would telly, and everyone was kind of tellying. We do Tuesdays. So Sean Glacken, right, the owner of Alpine Quest Sports. Shout out to Alpine Quest too.
Oh yeah,
our local telly shop.
I didn't know he was part of the Vail Players Club.
Well, he
loosely related.
Loosely related.
Guilty by association.
Exactly. We do these Telly Tuesdays, and I'm trying to bring that up with Bishop. Now we're trying to do Telly Tuesdays. Last year we kind of started it up, and just getting people out there to ski. Right, we just have a good time. We dress in costumes sometimes. It was just a fun group. So that's what we did a lot, and I was like, I love tellying. I've been doing it for a while. I was like, let's try to create this business around it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that makes sense. Is it kind of wasn't around for a while. Then you meet Finn, and I'm glad you're telling that story, because honestly, it's funny because the longer I've been in this, I realize guys like Finn, people don't even realize that there's gaps in manufacturing, or that somebody else began that, and then you've kind of picked it up in a different era. So it's that's probably why I wanted to do the podcast, is just so we can kind of document some of that history and whatnot. So yeah, that's cool. Are you guys doing the Telly Tuesday thing? Are you guys mostly Beaver Creek guys, or Vail, or both? Or
I mean, I do both, but we tend to do Beaver Creek more. It's like the one closest to us in Edwards here.
Yeah.
Also, honestly, if you go out just for a couple hours, like Beaver Creek, it's kind of like the hidden secret. Like it has a lot more that you can just do laps. Like you go to Grouse and you can do laps there. You can go, there's just a lot you can do kind of quickly in a few hours even. And then versus Vail's great mountain, but like
massive.
It's true. It's massive, and there's a lot of like traversing and getting to do a line and then taking a couple lifts to get back to do that same thing. Or, we tend to do that more at Beaver Creek. And I also know like Nate Goldberg, he runs the Beaver Creek like Nordic Center, and trying to work with him to try to get Telly going. He would help, sponsor it, get lessons going. I mean, trying to, grow the sport.
Yeah.
Locally.
No, I love that area too. Funny enough, that is where I learned how to ski, because I lived in Eagle, 87 to 89, right. Much different place.
I bet.
In that era. But yeah, I was in the Buddy Warner program at Beaver Creek.
Yeah, my daughter's in that now.
Really? Yeah, I used to take a bus by myself all the way from Eagle to Beaver Creek, and yeah, I mean, even back then, that was a really, really cool spot. I remember is Little Rose Bowl's there, right? Is that right?
Yep, Rose Bowl.
Yeah, I remember those were the Mogul runs when I was like a little. I think the Moguls were bigger than me back then, though. I was like 10 years old, so yeah, that was cool. And Arrowhead became part of Beaver Creek too, right? That's not separate. Right. Yeah. That's a cool zone, though. You got a lot of cool support. Like Alpine Quest is there on the old highway. You got I used to show my movies at Kirby Cosmos in Minturn, but then he had a location for a little bit in Edwards too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Huh. It might be before. Might have been right as you were getting there.
Maybe it was. Maybe it did have one of the there's this one kind of area that's had restaurants that have kind of cycled through, and
it's amazing how much it's amazing how much that area's growing. I feel like I'm the old man that like drives by and I'm like, all I remember was like a gas station and a Mexican restaurant in Edwards and like trailer parks. I mean, now it's like totally decked out. I mean, it's like a whole city in and of itself now, but
I think it's the biggest sort of seat of people in Eagle County.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was kind of the most people.
Huh. And is that, so when you set up, so it's not Bomber Industries anymore. I guess we should mention that.
Right. Yeah. So then, we had this little partnership, and then, okay, I was just going to kind of buy it from Fin. I basically kind of took the design, the initial Bishop design, along with the name. Like, people knew it, right? So the Bishop was what people knew, the Bomber Bishop. And so then he still had Bomber Industries. So I had to come up with a different name. And I kind of I remember brainstorming I hired this one guy trying to help me kind of think about it. It's like, we just couldn't come up with anything. It's like, it's Bishop. Like, that's what people know,
Totally.
So we just said, okay, it's and we started with Bishop Binding Co. as the company name. And then we kind of had another friend of mine who's a kind of local marketing guy, Dennis McMahon of High Five. Shout out to him. He helped kind of do some rebranding for us, and we just went to Bishop. So just took out the Binding Co. because we're doing skis, right? So we looked at, what are we going to do and what maybe do in the future, and I think we might do more than binding. So
make it a little more generalized.
Make it a little more general, yeah. So it's just Bishop.
And then you went into so once you set that up and you and Finn kind of split off, you did the Bishop 2.0 at that point,
right? Yep. Yeah. So with his help, right? It's like he knew, as every engineer designer, as soon as you kind of launch something, you have 100 things you'd want to change. Right?
Oh,
so it's always this hat. You got to always switch your hat, from especially a small company. Put on my sales hat and there's my engineering hat. Engineers look at stuff like, all right, how can I make this better?
Oh, so right? The pit, is that okay? That makes a lot of sense, because some of the stuff you changed on the 2.0, obviously you anodized some of the parts. You did the biggest thing I can think of is going from 2 pivot screws to a through pivot screw or bolt, or I can't remember what you guys call it, but
through axle.
Is that one of the things he told you that would break?
Yeah. Yep. Well, yeah, because we went through all the stuff that was issues, and those screws were great until like every time you're doing a telly turn, you're putting a little bit of torque on it.
Yep.
And if you didn't keep it tight, put Loctite on there, it would kind of come out. And as soon as it got loose, then it could break, because then you just have a smaller thread there. So that was one of the issues there. The tubes also, he would have some issues with like some fatigue cracks and those things. Because again, that was one thing about that I've learned, like designing a telly binding is such a challenge in terms of designing and engineering. It really is. Like it's, there's so much force into it's moving. It's a challenging thing to design. So we kind of fixed that. We fixed the tubes. I think that was kind of the main things, the two main things. The rest of it, I just didn't, it was like, let's relaunch it. The idea is like, let's relaunch that, get that going, get the brand back out there. And then at the meantime, work on what became the BMF line.
Yeah. And so that's cool to know that you guys actually kind of like overlapped and he helped you kind of bring that back. Cause that makes a lot of sense. And people were stoked, man. I mean, honestly, we still, whenever a pair of the original, well, there's a couple variations of the original ones that he was making, but whenever there's parts for those, man, I mean, we part them out and people need it, and there's still other dedicated. I'm sure you guys get hit up all the time for random
we need
parts.
to make a few. There's actually a few things like the toe lugs. We need to make a run of those, just because we want to support it. The binding will go kind of forever. Well, the only thing of those tubes, that's the one issue. If you ever look at those tubes, you just want to see if there's a crack at the front of the slot in those tubes.
Oh, okay.
And that's the one thing that we fixed with the 2.0 and moving forward, like the BMFs, and we have had 0 issues, which I'm actually pretty pleased with. We did a bunch of testing and we did a bunch of like dorky FEA, finite element analysis and whatnot. And we got to the point where it's good. Like we haven't seen that issue at all in the 2.0 or the BMS, which is nice. But those original ones, that's the one you be careful at, because that could be like you could be going along and then suddenly
the whole thing blows apart.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there kind of, I mean, it's interesting that you come from like a surgical tooling background. Like was there, and then you've got like a CNC binding. It makes me, obviously I know zero about surgical tools, but was there something with the metal that like you thought was cool with what Fin had come up with and kind of like where you could take it, or is there like no relation there? It just kind of happened that way.
It kind of happened. I mean, I definitely I was like, wow, this is cool. And I did kind of fall into it. So it wasn't like I'm going to go be, telemark binding manufacturer and
make it like a surgical tool.
And I've learned a ton, obviously, I look back at it, I definitely had some I've designed surgical instruments and they have to go through FDA clearance and there's incredible regulatory and testing, but they're also, for a while before I started consulting, I was at some bigger companies and, VC backed, tons of money, you can just throw money at stuff and and then you get into telemark and you're like,
it's pretty much the same thing, right?
This thing. It is. It actually is harder. Like a lot of times, like it's reusable. There's definitely some things about the surgical instruments I had worked on that are different and challenging, but this is a whole different ballgame. Like surgical instruments I would design or single-use disposable for like a sterile field.
Right.
Telly bindings are basically the opposite in all those categories.
Well, it's got to be, I mean, at least from what I've seen over the years, it's got to be almost nearly impossible to pre-test things to a point where every scenario possible is going to happen to that binding ahead of time before you take it to market, because there's, like you said, it's like all of a sudden you get out there, you got all these different styles, you've got all these different wear and tear, you've got somebody's doing a turn one way and then they're somebody of a different style is torquing it in a different way. I mean, it's just
different conditions and all sorts of things.
And you're talking like different weights of people and length of boot and all that, and that's got to be really hard. Before I forget, because this is an interesting part with that is I want to talk about kind of going into the BMF era of making bindings. And the first thing kind of pops up is you're coming from that 2.0. And I know we had this conversation when we first met back in the day, but you were pretty focused on like a full heel connection. And I was wondering if you could kind of shed some light, because I know people from an engineering standpoint, which I'm not an engineer. So of course I'm like, I don't know, Dave, that might not be the way to go. And you're like, no, that's the engineer. And I mean, and I've talked to other engineers, and I think maybe talk to the engineer minded people out there, because they're probably thinking a similar thing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it actually, to go back a little further. So Finn and I think we can talk about this a long time ago, but we had actually talked with Rockefeller, came to us to be the first manufacturer to license their second heel, basically, right? Like, so there's a huge history behind developing the new binding and the NTN, and that's a rabbit hole. But they came up with this second heel connection, right? And then they were the only manufacturer of a binding for a long time, which I think for the industry really pretty tough. It
stumped it for a while.
It really was tough. Yeah. I think it was a mistake. It was a classic, actually, almost business school thing, like PC versus Mac early on, like allowing the platform to just go out there and people just to use it, and to develop on it. But so that was tough. I think it actually came to us, Torstein, right? So Torstein kind of came to us at that time. He was marketing. He wasn't president or whatever. He's CEO or president.
He's CEO now. Right? Yep.
CEO. Yeah. So he was kind of VP of marketing or something like that. And great guy. He came out and visited, and it was tough because that was when Finn and I were like, we're not sure we're going to do this, and went back and forth. And, unfortunately it didn't end up happening. It would be interesting to see if we had gotten that deal to work. And in retrospect, like, that would have been maybe a good idea, but hindsight. But that being said, the second heel, I think technically, like, you look as an engineer, like holding on to that part of the boot, right? And also the front of the boot, they took the toe, right? So the 75 millimeter duck bill, right, has a long toe. It's like 3 times the length of an NTN toe, because the NTN toe is basically like an alpine touring toe.
Right.
The lip in front. And that's what we hold on to as teleskiers. You're kind of like that. There's a tremendous amount of force going into that to do our turn.
Into the toe itself.
Into the toe. So there's kind of two things. There's the toe, which is now you have a third of the lever arm, to get a little dorky. So you have 3 times the force going into that thing. So that's a big challenge for toe cages. And you'll see that 22. I'm sure Chris and Collins would back me up. Like, it's caused, and we've learned how to deal with it.
Did you guys end up with fracturing on that in your first?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Our first one did too. Yeah.
Same thing with Outlaw. Yeah.
22. Yeah. It's crazy how much force goes into that. So that's tough. And then the second heel, that's more like, if you're trying to like compress and compress those bellows, trying to hold on from that position under your arch, and right, there's only 2 sizes as well. Craig Dostie has a whole thing on his NTN's butt too big, or was it, or something like that? Remember this article?
Yep.
Yeah. So, which kind of talks about this, like, hey, there's 2 sizes, and now that's moving, where you're holding on, where you're putting that other force, which is the other critical force. Like, that's the 2 things. You got to hold on the toe, and you got to hold on somewhere else on the binding to allow it to flex, and that has to move. So holding on to that second heel, the forces aren't really compressing the bellows the same.
As you change boot sizes, probably too, because if you have a smaller,
as you change boot sizes as well,
a smaller boot, it stiffens. Like if you have like a 23.5 or 24 boot versus like a 29, I mean,
right,
same type of plastic. It's obviously you're short. I mean, is that true? Because I guess I always think that too. Like if someone has a smaller foot, I tend to give them a softer boot just because if you give them a really stiff plastic boot and they've got a small foot, I mean, the thing's like a rock. It doesn't seem like they're able to flex it very easily.
Well, you mean particularly with NTN versus like a
Correct.
75 or yeah, exactly. I think that's true.
Yeah.
And that's where people, I think early on, especially with Rotterfeller's binding and the way they designed their toe cage was the way it holds so far back, right? That's how they got it to be active. Again, we're going down a bit of a, but activeness, like how hard it is to flex, right? The bellows kind of.
Yeah, we talked about, Craig and I were just talking about that on a podcast, like the pivot point where you're activating the ball of the foot from lifting your heel up. That's a whole, I know. You can get as technical as you want, man.
Yeah.
People, the more you geek out, the more fans you get. Trust me. It's telly. Right, they'll love it, man.
Yeah. So, and everyone talks about ball of foot. When I was first designing the BMFs, I got a bunch of people together, Sean Glacken, Sean Hannigan, like some other local telliers, instructor I had, and I would do some design meetings. I kind of did this like I learned how to do product design development. So, I actually hired another engineer to help me kind of do it. So Pete Van Dyke, and then had intern Eric Warmanhoven who helped out kind of just get things going and testing. And we did iterations and we tried, hey, what do you want? What do you want out of a telly binding, right? And one of the things, there's lots of things, but one of the things was that ball of foot. You want to feel like you're connected to the ski, right? And so how do you get that? And that's kind of activeness. But it's a trade-off too, because if you try to clamp down, kind of like Rotterfeller did, a lot of people they kind of held onto the front of that toe really, really hard. And then you'd also see issues with the boots, right?
Oh yeah, crunches the toe on, because that toe, the free ride and especially the free ride, but free ride and freedom, it wraps so far around the toe that it would compress the sides of the boots, which is when 22 came out with the Outlaw, and probably your guys' binding is a little more of a riff off that, and it doesn't seem to crunch it.
You can't hold on. Yeah, you can't. We don't go as far either. I think our toe cages are pretty similar in terms of where we hold on.
Yep.
Because I want the whole boot to flex, and then you can have the flexibility to pressure the cuff, try to get that ball of foot down if you want. Other people don't do that, and they just kind of, are more in their toe. But you have to allow them to do it, and that was, I think, one of the key problems with the first Rotterfeller, and they were in the market for so long by themselves, that people got on it, and it made them ski a certain way, and I don't like this, right?
They also an interesting point on that too is the thing that's interesting about the free ride is when it came out, I think part of it, and I always mention this too, is people didn't really know how to customize their bindings with springs and stuff yet. Even me, I look back and I'm like, I didn't get that. They had 4 different springs and 5 settings on each. But the other thing that's interesting in hindsight is their pivot point where the cable catches underneath is actually really far forward. But then you have this, but then you have the second heel clamp into the boot. So you have this weird mixture of clamping down with a stiff spring, but then the pivot point's really far forward. And I think that kind of makes it just made a weird feel, where I think you guys have more of a set pivot point, obviously, where the knuckle kind of connects, and 22 obviously has a set point too. So what do you think about that? Just real quick before we move on, because I want to hear more about this, but what do you think about alternating pivot points? If you were to innovate on that idea in the future, do you like the customization aspects like that?
Yeah, I mean, it is something we looked at. It's just a matter of trying to get everything into it, the touring and making it adjustable. And I think a adjustable pivot point is something we definitely looked at. It just became there's just too many things to try to get into this binding.
Yeah.
And I think we also, actually, I remember now, some of the guys, we did a test, and we did a little test on activeness, right? So we saw in our little engineering test that we got the same amount of difference in how hard it is to flex the boot in a binding from moving, because we made a prototype that you could move pivot points. And we did a test between changing pivot points and then changing just springs. And it came out like, well, you can actually get the difference, that range of how hard it is to flex the boot, you could get through a spring difference.
Rather than switching the pivot and a spring.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that being said, I think there is some maybe subtle differences between how those work, right? How that's actually working. But we did look at it and we're like, okay, well, that simplifies an already complex design a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, this, the BMFs, are just, there's a lot of parts. Well, there's also really precision parts in there too. Like, I'm dealing with that right now. We have, some parts are plus or minus thousandths of an inch.
Jeez.
And, it's, so we're dealing with, okay, this is out. How do we fix it? And any manufacturer, this happens. Like, I tell Kate, so she's operations, but it's really just two of us. Like, two of us run this company.
No, that's cool. I'm glad you're saying that, because sometimes people think that it's like more people, and they're like, why didn't they call me back? You're like, there's like 20 emails an hour, and like we're trying.
Yeah, exactly. There's two people doing this, and that's really right now. Like, you go back to like the markets. Like, this is what and we talked about this, before, but that's what it can sustain. Like, we need to grow, and I think getting on this podcast, getting in your shop, like, getting people to know that Bishop's out there and an option is great, because there's definitely a lot of people that don't know we even exist still.
And you have a cool history. I love. Yeah, I'm glad you're talking. I'm glad we were able to talk about this, because, I think the history of the company itself, it's like, it's cool. It goes back a long ways, almost 20 years, or more.
Yeah, more. Yeah. I mean, Fin started. Yeah, it's about 20 years. So we have a lot of history, and I've learned a ton, through these iterations, and we iterate the binding every year and improve it and learn things. And but going to that back to the second heel. So we didn't go to the second heel really at that time, because I think we just weren't sure about the legality of it. Even though, honestly, I was like, all right, it's telemark. Really, you're gonna like sue us?
You never know. You never know.
I know it's happened. I've heard it's happened.
It has. Yeah, so for sure.
That's why I didn't do it. I just don't want to pay lawyers, and
that's like the last thing. I have some
good friends that are lawyers, but I don't like using them. So we're like, okay, we'll go to this. And there were other advantages too, right? By going to that back heel, first of all, I do think it flexes the boot in a way that's very different. And I don't know. I think I did some tests just last winter. A friend had a pair of Outlaw X's, and I had, and I was like, and we had the same boot size. And I was like, let's put one on each foot, because I just wanted to see. And I was like, I was honestly not expecting to, like, okay, let's just see. It's probably not that different. And I was like, whoa, the way these flex are really different. I really think, it'd be
just
great.
Pulling the entire boot versus that small section.
Yeah. Like where it pulls up from that arch, like under your arch, versus like compressing way back at the heel. And, there are disadvantages. It's a little bit heavier. Like but that's not what we are, right? We're not about like rando racing, and you're like, you're going to take a little bit, it's going to be a little bit heavier, but the idea is that it flexes in this really smooth, really progressive flex. And it's also really powerful. By holding back further, it is a bigger lever. That's the other, we can talk about the engineering lever, right? So it goes back and holds the entire boot versus holding just the front of the boot. So, torsionally, I think by far it's the most torsionally rigid, NTN or 75 out there, because it's fully metal connections
the whole way through,
toe to heel.
Well, and it's worth mentioning too. The one, because I said that too. I like the sleeker second heel just because it's less on the ski. But the one feature you guys have come up with that I think does address a certain issue is people go into NTN, and you guys have the ability to buy a 75 millimeter version, and you can convert that same exact binding to an NTN toe later on without having to buy a new binding completely. Which, that's, that has to be mentioned. That definitely serves a certain group of people that are not at the boot purchase phase, which we always say, when you buy new boots, that's when you want to start looking NTN. And just because if you're going to drop $700 on a pair of boots, the innovation is going to NTN. So it makes kind of a nice in between for people, I think.
Yeah, that was the other thing. So I think also like the flex, but it also allowed us to do that, to have both a 75 and NTN binding. It's basically the same except for a toe cage you can swap out. So there were definitely some advantages. Like, all right, well, not only we didn't have to deal with the legal, right, or worry about it at that time. So that's So we went forward with that. And yeah, I think it definitely has, it has those advantages of the full heel and the way it flexes, and the fact that it can get people who are on their 75 boots into a binding that can grow with them and change as they get into NTN boots. Yeah. And also look at it too. Like we definitely looked like we wanted to look a certain way, anodized, sleek. So we put some effort into the aesthetics of it and the beauty of it and the strength. So that's, what really Bishop is kind of all about, is like, it's about strong, Armageddon proof. Like this is the kind of really bomber binding. And even though we've had some issues, we're always standing behind it, always improving it. Anybody who has an issue, we always take care of. And now with our basically fourth generation, it's really, it's got
most of the kinks out of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's really it is bomber. And then the kind of look of it. The other thing is nice about stepping in and out is like it steps in really easy, right? Because you're stepping into your heel, your regular heel.
Yeah.
So stepping in and out is really easy. You don't need poles. You just jump into it, which a lot of like patrollers like that.
Oh, I could see.
Also, yeah. Good.
Oh, I could see that. I was actually going to ask you too. Did you riff off any past bindings when you were looking at how to do the heel step in?
Oh yeah, of course you do.
This is one of my
like, the best designer. Was it like Steve Jobs or someone from Apple? It's like good designers like borrow, great designers steal.
No, it's funny because
it's called benchmarking, right? So you want to do that. You want to look and see what works out there, right? Like,
oh, for sure.
You don't want to. That's the best way to design, and then maybe you kind of tweak it for your design. And so the step in heel, we played around a lot with that, and man, like that's a whole story too about like the 11th hour. We had designed the BMFs, and we were basically just doing hero laps at A-Base in early season. Like, hey, we're done. We got it. We're psyched. We're just going to have beers and athletes. We can get some pictures of them jumping around in the, little A-Base and little ribbon of death.
Yep.
The little park there. And then I come out. I think I had a beer. I went in, I came out, and everyone's standing around looking at the binding. I'm like, what's up? Dave, we have a problem. I'm like, what? Check this out. And like, basically, they were landing switch, like doing something off a jump, landing switch, and the binding came off. We're like, what is going on? And it turns out, and we're like, oh, what's going on? Like, we can't have that. It never happened. Like, to me, first of all, I'm not going.
You weren't landing switch.
Landing switch, right? Like, those times have passed. So and I think, unfortunately, I'm pretty easy on gear the way I ski. We tried to get other people on it. They were harder. And I think we did see some issues, but we always chalked it up during the design cycle. Like, like something else. This is a prototype. It doesn't have, the final parts. So that's where we had to come up with the heel lock. So that little
piece in the back.
That little piece in the back. And it's really only for certain instances where your heel is up and like you're landing or you're smashing down, but you're holding your boot heel up. So if you hold that boot heel up, there's enough inertia, there's enough mass. So Newton's second law comes in where the boot stops, but the binding keeps going or wants to keep going.
Wow.
And just the way that we had designed it, especially with, again, there's some complexities about preload. Like if there's not enough preload, it can flip off. So like, wow. So this is literally, what was it? It was probably now or a little later in the year.
You totally had to
like
remake.
middle of October. And we were launching in November. Jeez. Like our launch date was like end of November. And we're like, just all hands on deck. We iterated. Oh man, I probably did like 3 different design options we came up with. We iterated each of them like 20 times, using a 3D printer that we have. And I mean, it was, I kind of do like, it's kind of fun, but it's also really stressful, right? You're launching a product and you're like,
it doesn't work.
We gotta fix this. It works except for this one situation, but we can't allow that to be out there. Like,
yeah, you can't put like a sticker on it, be like, please do not land switch
jump on this or
while heel is up.
Yeah, don't land anything with your heel up. Even I think it could happen in like really hard moguls if you're slamming into a mogul, right? Like with your heel up. So yeah, we came up with the heel lock, and that was kind of, and the design was not designed for that. We had to use everything. Parts were in. We're like, okay, what do we have? What can we do and add a part to do this?
So you didn't actually have to redo the back part of the heel to add that?
No, the heel bracket was there. That pin, there was a pin back there.
Oh.
And we ended up just using that back pin and like, okay, what can we put on this? And we had all sorts of ideas, but that's where we put on this. And it's actually a 3D printed part. We never made a mold.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense for the volumes.
Yep.
So it's like a really nice production 3D printed part. Well, actually, the first ones were not the best production. They were cheaper, but we learned our lesson there. Like, we had to basically swap out almost all those that are out there. If you do have those, let us know. The very original heel lock, because we'll send you a new one. So yeah, that was kind of a crazy just and then finally this year I iterated and said, like, let's make this design a little more like what I would want to see. So we ended up changing the design. So there's new heel lock this year on all the new bindings. And you can also buy this as an upgrade. It's a cam pivot heel lock. It's just way more reliable. The original design, it worked, but this is the way it snapped into place. Like, that's the thing it snaps on was never really designed to be a lock, or like a hold that snap. So I looked at it, I was like, all right, I had some ideas. And so now we have a much better, more consistent kind of real, I wanted to fix it. So
yeah,
this year we have a really good heel lock, but that was one of the many sort of design, that one was crazy.
Yeah, no, I can't even
launch.
Yeah, literally, like right as you're getting it out the door. And one thing I just thought of that we talked about, because a lot of people, it's a larger binding, but I think you said it right. It's a larger binding, but I wondered, you brought up the enduro thing when we were talking the other day.
Yeah.
And I thought
it's like an enduro binding. It's like an enduro bike.
I was trying to explain this to Dusty, and of course, neither one of us is a mountain biker. So I'm like, yeah, Dave said something about enduro, and maybe explain that to people, because I actually thought that was a good argument. Because I mean, obviously, people walk in, and if you get the weight weenies that are like, all right, they walk in with their scale and they're like ready to check the binding out and what it weighs and their ski, and then it's like they're looking at your binding.
You should be on a tech binding, right? Like,
totally. And they're looking at yours like, what? Like that's machined metal and all this. And so yeah, maybe just shed some light on kind of the concept, because when you explain that to me, I'm like, okay, I'll buy that. I can actually see the thought process in that.
Yeah, and that's what it is. Like, that's what we thought. It's not about this super light, spandex going super fast. And it's like, so the idea is like a cross country bike. So mountain biking, there's kind of different categories. There's cross country, there's trail, and there's enduro. There's downhill, and those kind of increasingly like burlier bikes, a little bit heavier, but they're the trade-off is between uphill and downhill, really. So uphill efficiency, right? How fast you're going to go and how quickly you're going to get up the hill. And the other one is like how fast you're going to go down and how gnarly of terrain you're going to go down, right? So a downhill bike, those guys go, off crazy stuff, but you don't want to climb those. So the one step down from a downhill bike that's like big double crown fork, they're just big bikes, made to go over boulders and at like 50 miles an hour. You got to watch some of these like pro downhill mountain bike races.
Oh, that's crazy.
Insane. They're insane. But next step down is enduro, and that's where you actually have to climb the bike up. So there's different stages in enduro mountain bike races, but you also go down, not quite a downhill mountain bike course, but pretty gnarly. Like, it's got drops, it's got rock gardens, 5, 6, maybe even gaps and things you have to go over. But so that's kind of where I was like, well, that's kind of what this binding is. Like, it's not the lightest thing going up, but it can climb. Like our BMFR, I took it for 7 days. I did the Erner Traverse in 2019, which was awesome, actually, in Switzerland. And I was the only one in our group on telly. And I make some modifications when I go on longer tours. Like I take the toe cage off, or the toe, under your foot, toe cage cover off. And I take the brakes off too, just because the brakes are just kind of always pushing up on the boot. So if I go on long tours, I take the brakes and the toe cage cover off, because it also clears the snow a little bit better. But it was awesome, on that tour. And, it wasn't that much more. Like, it's a little more weight, but I was also really confident going down. And in the backcountry, you get all sorts of weird snow and, kind of crazy conditions. And so that's the idea is, okay, you're going to maybe sacrifice a little bit going up, but you're going to be in a bomber, fully confident binding going down. Like, you can go down anything and feel like, okay, this is not going to break out in the middle of nowhere. And it's going to handle anything that I throw at it. And if I need to do alpine turns, it's super stable to get down something, right, on it, doing alpine turns.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So,
I'm glad. Yeah.
The enduro binding.
The enduro. I know. I like that. Well, so that was awesome, man. Talking about the engineering of that, I think that's really good. And I wanted to mention too, like a few years ago, you guys started making skis, and I think two models, right? Chetty and Gonzo. Okay. Yep. And what are the how has that experience been? I mean, jumping from
that was kind of crazy. I wasn't really, I'd thought about it, but then there's this guy who's a huge bomber fan who worked at the Never Summer factory down in Denver. He ran the manufacturing there, and he's like, Dave, I want to make a ski, like, for you guys, like a tele ski. You can make this ski. I have an idea. I was like, all right. BJ was his name. And I was like, okay, that'd be cool. And I thought about it. I was like, that's where also rebranding, like, it makes sense for us. We make bindings, like we can make a ski to go with it. And he's like, he kind of helped us design the first Chetty. And then I kind of like, I was like, all right, I want to learn more about ski design. And that was a really fun thing for me to do as well. I think it was a great compliment to what we already offered. They were kind of matched for our bindings. And the first ones were really just kind of reinforced the mounting area. Because, right, a lot of ski companies won't warranty for telly.
Right. Yeah, especially when you get the lighter cores and stuff. Like. Yeah. Yep.
So we were like, okay, this is going to be like a super bomber extra reinforcement where we mount. And then I think it was when we came out with the telemark technology, that was the kind of like, oh, we can actually really make the ski for telly versus the top sheet. And, like a lot of these other telemark skis back in the day, right, they were just maybe a little softer. And you've had some shows, I think, talking about this. Yeah, it was I don't know exactly, but
they basically took the metal out and they put a different top sheet. That's the old school story of it for sure.
Right. Yeah. So this was like, okay, let's actually make this. We only mount in this area, right? It's like 8-inch segment of the ski. It takes all the force. So, okay, let's reinforce that, but then let's make a ski that flexes everywhere else. So we actually take advantage of the fact that we don't, like alpine skiers, right? There's like a massive amount of the ski that basically doesn't bend, right? It's just a rigid bar because your boot is in there,
right?
And the two ends of the bindings that are then drilled into the ski. So there's kind of a big sort of dead zone. So we kind of re-engineered and looked at it. I was like, okay, let's actually change the construction and the core and everything to allow the whole ski to flex from, just taking advantage of the fact that a tele binding only holds on to a small portion of the ski. So you don't have to reinforce it. And in fact, we don't reinforce it in the back. So like you should not mount an alpine binding on this ski. Like it's not designed for it. Like it probably would pull out. I don't know. Like we don't have binding pads where you mount the heel of an alpine ski.
Yeah, not like a volet ski or something like that actually has the pad. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And so you guys are calling that telemark technology.
Yeah, that was Christopher Ewart, who used to do our social media, ripping local skier. He was like, I was like, is it telearc? He's like, no, it's telemark.
Telemark.
Telemark technology. I like it. We'll go with that. That's good.
No, that's cool. And so you guys have those 2 skis this year.
Yep.
And so I guess the question, and I want to make sure I get it in here, is what is there anything on the docket for the near future, or like where what can people, because I love these first podcasts, because I mean it kind of just gives the history and what's going on. Yeah. But I know people are probably like, okay, like now what?
Yeah.
I mean,
we'll do some check-ins in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And I was kind of curious, like what do you guys have cooking this year?
Yeah, so the one thing that we have on the plate, so one of our athletes, Marshall, he kind of started playing. He's the lurk, right? He had that in the King of the Heel, King of the Lurk.
Yeah, King of the Heel with the lurk. Yep, I remember that.
Yeah, so people have been playing around with lurks for a long time, right? It's ancient. There's a lot of history there. And so, we've been talking, hey, what if, we actually made a production lurk, one that you could use in the resort. It would also break down so you can actually get on a lift, but also break down so you could hike with it. So he has a backcountry lurk concept, and he actually I'm not sure he's going to sell them this year, but he did his own, he kind of made his own, kind of iterated a little bit, made a little prototype. It's actually in the shop right now. And so that's what I think we're going to maybe play around with a little bit this year, is looking at making a lurk. And it's really, it's pretty fun. I don't know if you've skied with one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean,
recently, right?
Yeah. I mean, not recently. Yeah. I mean, but that seems like it's always kind of floated out there, and it's got some fun history tidbits, but yeah, it's always, even when I saw his segment last year, it seems like it kind of goes in phases, like somebody will come back around and all of a sudden they're doing crazy stuff on it. And I'm like, oh yeah, the lurk, look at that thing. So
yeah, it's a fun thing. We're going to play around with this year and see where it goes. Maybe look to, coming up with a design that we could produce. And then the other thing is maybe a ski, for us, we have kind of the Chetty. It's 100 underfoot. It's kind of our all around. It's got a little rocker up front. We've got the 90 underfoot Gonzo, which is kind of more front side, full camber. So then more of a powder type ski, right? Which actually we'd like to kind of get the feedback from the Telly tribe out there too. Like, what would you want in a Telly specific powder ski?
Okay. Send those guys your thoughts, you guys.
Yeah, send us your thoughts. We'd like to hear it. I kind of know what people are using, what we like, but where kind of the industry is going.
Yep.
With that kind of stuff. So, but that's the other possibility. And then we're always improving and playing with the binding as well. So that's something we're kind of continuously looking at.
Oh, I love it, man. Well, that's cool. I mean, that's good on you for pushing through, and I mean that's a no. I mean, and like we said, I mean, when there's two, you got two people running it, and I always iterate that on the podcast, like people, you guys are a true telemark company in the sense that if telemark was actually dead, that you would cease to exist, just like I would, and you guys are the types of companies that people need to support, and that the more support you get, the more opportunity to innovate and add products to the lineup. So
exactly,
and that's cool. You're looking for feedback from people too. I think that's cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys pull together. It's it's gonna be a crazy winter, as we all know.
I know it is gonna be interesting with this whole with the pandemic, and I'm pretty positive. Honestly, our sales so far are good. I don't know what you're seeing at the shop, but it's strong.
Yeah, people, I think people are ready to roll. I think it was a little scary in March when we were all like, wait, you're going to close the resorts, and like, you know, like it just was a little unknown. But no, I think it's going to be a good season. And, you know, things like this too, like they trim the fat. Like the people, I always say, like the people that don't want to do telemark, they quit. So it's good for people like us because, you know, if you're not into it, you're probably going to get out when you know, like a pandemic's a great example. I mean, I wouldn't have wished a pandemic on anybody by any means, but it's made certain retailers, I won't name any, but certain retailers are trimming their fat, which I am happy to bulk up, so to speak. I'm ready.
For the winter.
Feed me the fat, people. Let's do it. Well, cool, man. Well, I anything else you wanted to get out to people before we wrap up?
No, I think, like you said, I mean, support and feedback is something we're always looking for from the Telly tribe, and spread telemark, and we're just trying to also get the Bishop telemark name out there.
Cool, man. Yeah, that's great. And I'll put links to the website and social media handles, and check those out, you guys. And we just started carrying the Bishop stuff here, so you guys can find it here at the shop as well. And I'm stoked to check out one of those prototype lurks when you get it done. We'll do do some shredding. I love it, man. Well, thanks for being on the show, man. I hope you have a great winter, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Yeah, you too. Take care. Cheers.
Right. See ya. Great conversation with Dave Bombard. I really appreciate him taking the time to do the show. And I'm so glad we kind of got into the early history of bomber industries with Fin Doyle. And yeah, like I was saying, you guys know, I talk about the history a lot. I'm always digging up that stuff. And honestly, it's because there's, you know, I think just being around for a long time, I've seen all these really cool companies come up, innovation, ideas, and I just love that that's a part of our history. And what a better way to document that than a podcast. And hopefully you guys are digging those little history nuggets along the way as well. But I want to wish Bishop the best this year. Like I said, we're going to carry it in the shop. We've already got skis in, and with the Chetty model, and also the Gonzo, so you can check those out on freehilllife.com. Like I always say, if you want to throw something additional towards the podcast specifically, you can make a donation of your choice at paypal.me/freehilllife. Telemarkskier.com for all your gear, reviews, needs, articles, culture, all that good stuff. We're on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can always email me at podcast@freehilllife.com. Always love to hear your ideas, your feedback, corrections, and all that good stuff, even if you just want to say, what up? So until next week, my friends, spread telemark always. Peace out.